Hi Reader Pops, welcome back to the channel. If you have not noticed, I have not done any monthly reading wrap up on this channel yet, which I typically do a January reading wrap up, February, each individual month. But I've been reading at a slower pace this year because my goal was to just read quality books and go after the books that I really want to read, even if they are 500, 600 pages. And this year, I'm already so excited about the books that I've read so far. I think I've read 16 this year, so it's been 3 months so far. But I've read some really long books that I've been wanting to get to. I'm really reading outside of my usual comfort zone of romance books. You'll see all the different types of genres and authors I've tried so far. I'll give you a little sneak peek of what we're working with over here. I have all the books right here, but before we get into that, this video is so kindly sponsored by Book of the Month. Look how cute. If you guys don't already know what Book of the Month is, it's a monthly subscription box for books. They have people vet tons of books and then choose the ones that they think are the best. And I always end up finding amazing books from authors that I just wouldn't have found otherwise. So it just takes all the work out of it. And then they just ship it to your house. So this month they chose Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld. So this one I know I'm gonna eat up. It's about this woman who is a comedy writer, I think, or a comedian. She writes this little sketch about how less attractive men can pull really attractive women just because they're funny. And she thinks that would never happen to her, even though she's a comedian, but because she's female, she would never pull like a super attractive man. But then there's a super attractive pop star who comes into her life and the book goes from there. So I am very excited to read this. And then I got Advocate and the Hollywood Wives by Kirthana Ramsady. They say if you like Taylor Jenkins Reid, then you would like this book. You can also skip any month and not get charged for it. So if you guys are not already signed up for Book of the Month, you can use the link down below and use code SPRING and you'll get your first hardcover for only $9.99, which is actually an insane deal. So thank you, Book of the Month, for sponsoring this video. And let's get into the books that I read in January. I'm going to gloss over this one pretty quickly. It's The Cheerleaders by Kara Thomas. This is a YA murder mystery. This book just doesn't really elicit that much response from me. I think I was in a reading slump when I read this because honestly, it's a pretty good murder mystery and I love young adult ones, especially because they're just like, they're not that scary. They're easy to read. It's honestly, if I was in the mood, this would be very good. If you want a good YA thriller, you should probably read this, but I gave it 3 stars and I don't really ever think about it for some reason. Okay, honestly from here, everything is good. So I read Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. It's her newer release and it's about a tennis world champion who's retired, but then she's watching someone take over her world record and she gets pissed off about that, so she has to come out of retirement, retrain, even though she is an older woman now. And then you get to watch her at a bunch of different tennis events and see if she overcomes. Her dad is her coach, so you get to see the daughter-father relationship, which is really, really sweet. There's a little tiny bit of romance subplot, which is always great. And I feel like the biggest part about this book is just Carrie Soto's personality. She is the most brash, brazen, blunt, pretty much rude character that I've ever read about. And it's so fun to read because it's just hilarious. Like when she's getting interviewed, she'll just say the darndest things, like things that are just downright mean. And it's so unbelievable that she's just saying it that it made me laugh out loud a ton of times. You would think that reading about tennis is not fun, but I promise even if you don't know anything about tennis, you'll still really enjoy this book, in my opinion. These are the types of literary fictions that I just end up loving. I give this one 4.5 out of 5 stars and I highly recommend you read it. So good. Okay, oh my gosh. Next I read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This is another literary fiction. Oh, how do we even start describing this book? It's about Sadie and Sam. They are both video game designers. They create video games and you follow their lives from childhood all the way up until they're in their 30s and you even get some backstory on their parents. This is like a 400-page book, but it feels like 1,000 pages because of how much information and how long of their lives that you get to see. It also feels like 2 books in one because halfway through, it feels like it should be over already, but we're starting a new plot line, it almost feels like. But I think about this book often still because of the way that she wrote the characters. They felt so real and her writing style was just actually insane. Like if I ever become an author one day, I want to just study how she wrote sentences because I love how she writes so much. I don't really want to even say what the book is about. You're just following these characters interact with each other as they create a video game. It sounds so random and so boring, but it is fascinating. This is a 5 out of 5 stars for me. First 5-star of the year is right here. Next, I read Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is like a historical fantasy book that this one was a thick one. The theme is to touch on colonization, but in a fantasy setting where their whole magic system is built off of languages and metal, silver. So you follow a boy who was taken from his hometown in China over to London because he can speak Chinese and he also gets taught Latin and Greek, which makes him very valuable for the world that they live in. I gave this book 3 stars, which makes me really sad because it's so impressive what she did in this book and I love the idea of talking about a real world issue in a fantasy setting, but it ended up kind of reading like a textbook. It didn't feel like a metaphor. It felt like she was just saying what she was saying, and it was very on the nose type of thing. So yeah, this was a 3 stars. Next, I read Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. This is a historical fiction, which I never read. I hear historical fiction and I run the opposite direction. It just sounds so boring to me. But this is nothing like you or I would ever imagine. This is set in the 1960s, I believe. We are following Elizabeth Zott, who is a chemist, and she's female. So just imagine the sort of hoops that she was having to jump through in the 1960s. No one respected her. She's an attractive blonde lady. She just gets objectified. There's also some graphic essay in this book that was like actually described, which was very shocking to me. So definitely check the trigger warnings for this book. But this is very much a character-driven book. Elizabeth Zott is such a vibrant character. Her dog 630 is such a vibrant character. Calvin, I believe is his name. There's a bit of a love interest in here, and every single character in this book I still remember to this day. If you want an audiobook, definitely listen to this one on audiobook. I love the narrator for this one. I kind of want to just look up the narrator and then listen to whatever other books that she has done, because I loved her voice so much. This book is funny, it's sad, and if you just want a good character-based book, I highly recommend this one. I gave it 4 stars, but it's one of those books that I still think about almost every day, so I highly recommend this book. If you want to watch a vlog of me reading these 3 books, it was in my I read the most viral books of 2022 on my main channel. That's where these ones were, and I think these 2 were in my Instagram chooses what books I read. So now we are in February. I started the month off with The Stolen Heir by Holly Black. This comes after the Cruel Prince trilogy, which if y'all don't know, I absolutely love. It's young adult fantasy, and this one is about the little brother. Actually, it's not. It's about a different character named Surin, but her interactions with the little brother from The Cruel Prince. And I absolutely loved it. It's in the same world, and I just love this type of fantasy. It's so whimsical. The little drawings in here. It's got fae. Just look at this map. The little drawings on each chapter just gives you an idea of what the writing and the world is like. I loved the romance. I love Holly Black's writing. I love this world so much. I only gave this one 4 stars, I think, but that's because a little bit of the plot kind of got boring to me at the end, but I don't care. I love everything that comes out of this world that she writes about, so I will continue to read it. I think there's another book coming out in this series, I hope. But if you want some whimsical YA fantasy, I highly recommend this book. I honestly highly recommend so many of the books that I've read this year, which is so fun. I feel like I'm actually reading books that I really love, because this is my 3rd year of reading, so I'm kind of getting more of a feel for what I will like, which is really cool. Here's a random nonfiction for you. I read A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis. This is like the weirdest pamphlet thing ever. It's just what I found on Amazon, but I think this is public domain, so you can just read it for free online if you want to. I love C.S. Lewis and his writing. He just has an ability to put into words emotions that I felt that I have never been able to describe, and it's just the most satisfying thing to be able to read what has been trapped in your brain for so long. I don't know. I personally really enjoyed it, but I am a massive C.S. Lewis fan, so take this for what you will. And then I read The Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson on my Kindle. That is a YA fantasy book, and it's in the same series as The Dance of Thieves, Vow of Thieves duology, which I gave 5 stars, and I was very excited to read this one. It was recommended to me by Stephanie Garber, who read the Caraval trilogy, from this video where I asked my favorite authors to recommend me a book. I think The Kiss of Deception is a really great first book in a series that will be amazing, but so much of the end of it was just them riding on a horse on this journey that I thought was going to evolve into something else. And the book ends right where I feel like a story is about to bloom, so I feel like the second book would be great. But the first one, I got so bored. But I love her writing. I know it has potential, so I gave it 3 stars. I don't really have any plans of continuing the series though, if I'm being honest. And then, oh, this starts a new era in my year of reading. I read Billy Summers by Stephen King, my first ever Stephen King book, and this was recommended to me by Lynn Painter. So this is not horror. I never read Stephen King because I thought the only thing he wrote was horror and that I would be scared. This is like a crime fiction book about a guy who gets hired to kill people, but he only kills people who he believes are bad, and he gets hired for his last mission, and it's the last one he's gonna do before he retires. So you're watching him set up to complete this mission, and then 200 pages through this book, something that is not on the back of the book happens. Definitely check trigger warnings. There are very descriptive things about a certain topic that can be very gruesome, but it ends up being a story about these 2 characters who are so unlikely to hang out together, but it ends up being so endearing, and I want to cry thinking about it. I love these characters. This is like the most unexpected story ever. I don't know how to describe it. It just was so I feel so much when I think about this book, and that is just a great sign. It's 5 out of 5. I literally have chills on my body. Clearly, I highly recommend this. It did start off slow for me, but once you get to that 200 page mark, you're like, wait a second, this is a completely different story. Also, can we talk about how all Stephen King books, well, I don't know about all, but so far the ones that I've bought are just printed on like the best floppy paperbacks. Like this is 500 pages, but you don't have to crack the spine because they just made it so well. First one I ever read, and I ended up making a reading only Stephen King for a week video. I'm currently filming that, so it's not out yet, but I'm going on a Stephen King binge because of reading this. So if you've never read him before, I highly recommend you get into it. Then in March, literally all of these books, I can show you what main channel video it was read in. If He Had Been With Me by Laura Nowlin. This is a YA contemporary romance, and it's supposed to be very sad. Like they just tell you the tragic thing that happens on the first page, and then you read the full thing and you kind of forget that it happened, but it did, and they tell you that it did. But you end up just following Autumn as she is going through high school. It's very juvenile at first. It's just about like her high school problems, her friend group, people that she dates, blah, blah, blah. But she always had this childhood crush on Finn, but they never got together, and they grew apart and they had different friend groups, and you just watch what happens between them. You definitely watch that. I really love this book. It's definitely more juvenile and angsty because keep in mind, you're reading a young adult book, so think about the audience. But I loved it because I love angst. This is definitely in like the part of my brain that loves Twilight is also why I love this book. I feel like there were some good quotes that I underlined, and I gave it 5 stars because I'm not being picky about YA. Like this being 5 stars and then Billy Summers being 5 stars is so different. Like this is clearly like for adults and this is clearly for middle school Haley, but both parts of me can enjoy both, if that makes sense. So depending on topics you like to read about, both are 5 stars in my opinion. This is like the first book of the year that was more in the genre that I used to read a ton, which is just adult romance, and that is the Happy Ever After playlist by Abby Jimenez. And it was actually very interesting to go back to this genre after basically not reading it all year when it used to be the only thing I read all year in like 2021. I'd consider this one pretty good for adult contemporary romance, but I just don't think it's not my thing right now, which is so weird to change genres. I definitely enjoy romance still. I think about it all the time, but I really enjoy romances as subplots in other books, like a Stephen King book, which you would never expect, or Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, where it's not just the typical romance plot where you know they're gonna have a 3rd act breakup and you know there's gonna be stupid conflict, stuff like that. But this one was pretty good considering that I was critiquing those things in the genre so heavily. This girl just finds a dog who runs out in front of her car, and it turns out to be the dog of a very famous musician. And then they just end up meeting each other and the story goes from there. Some plots of romance books are so out of pocket. Like that is so, it's whimsical, you know? It's just for fun. I gave this 4 stars, but I honestly don't really think I would recommend it to anyone I know in real life. I honestly maybe want to give that one a 3, but I don't know. I read a fun little thriller because I was on a plane. So I read The Housemaid by Frida McFadden, and this is a perfect candy book. Perfect for the plane. Fast-paced thriller. Very easy to read sentences. Fun plot twists. You're just following this girl who really needs a job, and she gets hired to be the housemaid of this very rich family's house, and she has to stay in the upstairs tiny room with a lock on the outside of the door that she has no control of. Scary. And it goes from there. Oh, I give this 4.5 stars. It was just fun. Like for a fast-paced thriller, this one's very fun. And then I read Heart of a Raven Prince by Sonia Odette. This is one of those fun fantasy romance books. I think there actually was a little bit of spice in here, which I was not expecting because it gives off like YA vibes, but I don't think it is actually. We've got Faye in here and it's a Cinderella retelling. I'm just gonna go ahead and say right now, it was a 3-star for me. I don't recommend this book, which made me really sad because Sarah Crowley loves this book. They go to balls. I love when they go to balls in fantasy, but this one just didn't hit for me. Then okay, here's an example of a book that I'd been wanting to read for so long, but because it's so long, but because it is over 600 pages, I just put it off, and that is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This is a YA epic high fantasy, which is something I've never really read before. I usually read romance fantasy or, yeah, just fantasy that is not super politically involved, but this one definitely is. And Brandon Sanderson is very big in the fantasy space if you are not aware of the big authors in that genre. They also say that he's just very easy to read. Like even though it's very politics driven and it's a very long book and you're getting into this whole, you know, high fantasy world, it's very intimidating to learn new words and stuff, but his writing is just very accessible. Some people even think it's almost too simple. I didn't think that. I really liked it. And I really just like that you're following a bunch of characters who are trying to take over over the ruler of this government and this world, and they have a really cool magic system involving metals, and you just end up getting very attached to the characters. Last line of this book makes me cry. I can't wait to continue it because it's a trilogy, and I think I'm going to love the next book. So I'm giving this one a 4-star, maybe 4.5. There were a few parts where you're following certain characters where I was a little bit bored, but it's honestly going to be worth it, I think, for the rest of the trilogy. Okay, last two here. I read Clockwork Prince by Cassandra Clare, which is the second book in the Infernal Devices trilogy. This is like a historical fantasy romance because it's set in the 1800s in London. This is the Shadowhunter world, so they're like demon hunters, and I can't really explain. Trying to explain stuff like that sounds so funny. There's a love triangle in this book, and honestly, if there wasn't such a heavy romance plot in this one, I think I would have actually been so bored and really not enjoyed it very much. But because the writing of the romance was so good, I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It's such a famous series that I feel like my thoughts are pretty skewed by like the fan base, because honestly, the mission that they were on bored me a little bit. But sometimes I also think about these characters though, and I'm like, this could be a comfort series. So I'm just going to have to read these books because of how popular they are. And it's like in the genre that I like. So this one's a 4-star. We're just gonna hold out hope for the rest of the 20 books in the series. And lastly, most recently, I have read Misery by Stephen King. I think this is actually horror by him, but I did not find it scary in the way that like I can't sleep at night or I can't read it before bed type of thing. So it was perfect for me because I still like a good thriller, a good gruesome scene. You know, there were some gruesome scenes in here that I have only ever really read, I guess, in other horror books. This one is very famous if you do not know. It's about an author who gets kidnapped by his #1 biggest fan, who keeps him locked up in her house and forces him to write another book about a main character named Misery. And that's the plot. They're just in that one room in the house, and it was so fun to read. I was eating it up. And you'll see my review very soon in my Reading Stephen King for a week, so I won't go into detail, but I gave it like 4.5 stars. So those are all the books that I've read so far this year. I feel like I'm actually starting to ramp up my reading back to kind of the pace that it was last year, just because there are so many books that I'm very excited to read. Please recommend me a book that you've really loved this year. Can't wait to start doing the monthly wrap-ups again. So thanks for watching this. You can watch me read these real time on my Instagram stories or go to my main channel to see the vlogs. And I'll see you guys somewhere else on the internet. Bye!